Let me ask you something. What if one of the most brilliant minds in modern psychology, someone who spent his entire life exploring the hidden layers of the human soul, had a near death experience so profound that he never spoke of it publicly again? What if that secret was never meant to be lost? Because what Carl Jung saw might just change the way you think about life, death, and everything in between. In the spring of 1944, Carl Gustav Jung, father of analytical psychology, lay in a hospital bed after suffering a massive heart attack. For several minutes, he was clinically dead. But what happened during that short stretch of silence, what he saw when his heart stopped, didn't disappear when he returned. No, it stayed with him. And it shook the very core of everything he thought he understood about life, the psyche, and the soul itself. And yet, he told almost no one. He didn't publish it in any of his books. He didn't mention it in lectures or interviews. Instead, he buried the experience inside a private letter, a message written for just one unnamed colleague, a letter that would remain hidden from the world for nearly 80 years. Why? Why would a man who dedicated his life to decoding the unconscious stay silent about the most personal, most spiritual moment of his existence? Jung believed the world wasn't ready, that sharing what he saw would not awaken people, it would overwhelm them. And maybe he was right. The 1940s weren't kind to those who challenged materialism. A scientist who spoke of the soul risked being dismissed or, worse, discredited. So Jung waited. And then he let the silence carry the weight of his vision. Now, nearly a century later, that letter has resurfaced. And what it reveals isn't just a private confession. It's a map, a message, and maybe a mirror. Because what Jung encountered beyond the veil wasn't just about death. It was about how we live now and what it really means to awaken before it's too late. What happens when your heart stops, but your awareness keeps going? In the spring of 1944, Carl Jung, a man whose entire life had been spent exploring the psyche, the soul, and the unconscious, suffered a massive heart attack. For a few minutes, he was gone, clinically dead, no pulse, no breath, and yet something in him continued. Jung later described those moments not as a blackout, but as a breakthrough. He said that his consciousness didn't disappear, it expanded. In that suspended state, detached from his body, he saw the earth not as we see it from an airplane window, but as a glowing blue sphere hanging in the darkness of space, a jewel, fragile, distant, beautiful. He was no longer in the world. He was outside of it, beyond it. Then he was drawn toward what he described as a vast, timeless expanse. Not a tunnel, not a place of clouds or gates, but a kind of temple built not from stone, but from light itself. And in that temple, everything he thought was him began to fall away. His identity, his memories, his theories, even his thoughts. All of it was stripped back like old paint. And what remained was something deeper, something untouched by time or story. The soul. And here's the part that changed him forever. Jung didn't meet angels. He didn't see divine figures or hear choirs in the clouds. What he encountered was something quieter but far more profound a presence. A being, one that didn't speak in words, but poured understanding into him like sunlight warming the skin, silent, pure, direct. In that space, Jung came to a truth that shook even his vast knowledge of human psychology. The soul is real, and death is not the end. It is a passage, a return, a continuation of something we've always been but rarely touch in this life. And maybe that's why he stayed silent. Because how do you explain to a world obsessed with logic and form that what's most real is what you feel when everything else falls away. How do you tell people that what they call the end is actually the beginning? Just before Jung was pulled back into the world of the living, he was shown something else, something that felt less like a dream and more like a vision. It wasn't about his own life. It wasn't some replay of personal memories or regrets. No, what he saw was larger. It was about you saw of us, a glimpse into what humanity might one day become. In that timeless space of light, Jung saw the boundary between life and death, thinning, not metaphorically, but literally, as if the veil separating this world from the next was beginning to tear, and people in the future would begin to feel more, sense more, perceive not only what's visible, but what lies just beyond it. And with that new sensitivity, he saw two paths. On one hand, enlightenment, expansion, awakening, but on the other, chaos, disorientation, a kind of spiritual vertigo. He called it the space between worlds, a phrase that never appeared in his public writings. It was his way of describing a state where the human spirit is no longer fully anchored in the material, but not yet fully grounded in the eternal, a liminal zone, a crossroads between what we think is real and what actually is. And in that vision, Jung saw a future world bathed in pure light. Everything was visible. Pain had been dissolved, suffering erased. Even death had become transparent, like a door left ajar. At first, it seemed like paradise. But then came the warning. Without shadow, there is no depth. Without pain, the soul loses its weight. Jung wasn't glorifying suffering. He wasn't saying we should chase misery. What he was pointing to was contrast, the sacred tension between light and dark that shapes us not as punishment, but as passage. Without the night, there is no dawn. Without breaking, there is no becoming. He feared that in the pursuit of a painless world, we might create a shallow one where everything is illuminated, but nothing is understood, a world of light without meaning. And perhaps that's why he kept the vision hidden, because this wasn't a prophecy to be proven. It was a warning to be felt. At the very edge of life between breath and silence, Carl Jung was granted a single question. Just one. In that vast, eternal space, detached from the body, detached from time, he didn't ask about God or heaven or even his own fate. He asked, what is truth? Not knowledge, not belief. Truth. And the answer didn't come in words. It came as a vision. He saw a tree doll, ancient and alive. Its roots plunged deep into a thick black soil hidden in darkness. But its crown was engulfed in fire. Not destruction, but light pure and radiant. That image, it stayed with him because it said something that words never could. Truth isn't something you inherit. It's not passed down like facts in a textbook. Truth is earned. Its roots grow through darkness, through pain, confusion, loss, and the things we don't talk about. But the deeper those roots reach, the higher the light can rise. It's tempting to think that wisdom lives only in the lightened, the good, the peaceful, the understood. But Jung saw something else, something we often forget. Without shadow, there's no shape. Without descent, there's no ascent. Without suffering, there's no awakening. Truth, in its purest form, isn't comfort. It's growth. It's the kind of clarity that breaks you open, not to wound, but to transform. And maybe you felt that too. Maybe in a loss, a breakdown, or a quiet moment where everything you thought you knew stopped making sense and something else began to emerge, something deeper, something real. That tree Jung saw, it wasn't a symbol for a chosen few. It was a map for anyone willing to walk into their own depths and rise with light they earned. So let me ask you, what have your roots had to grow through? And what fire, what light are you finally ready to carry? Carl Jung didn't want to come back. When his heart began to beat again and the hospital room reappeared the doctors, the fluorescent lights, the weight of his body, it all felt distant, heavy, foreign. He returned to life, yes, but not as the same man. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. His mind, once a master of theory and though had now seen something that theory alone could never touch. And yet, he didn't tell the world what he saw. He didn't rush to publish it. He didn't step onto stages and proclaim revelations. He went silent, but not because he was afraid. It was something else, something deeper. He knew that some truths, especially the ones that touch the soul, can't survive the noise of public debate. They're not meant to be dissected in journals or reduced to psychological jargon. So Jung did what mystics and seers have done for centuries. He hid his truth in symbols. In the years that followed, his work became more layered, more mythic, more alchemical. He wrote of archetypes, of the anima and the shadow, of the self and the journey inward. But underneath all that, he was speaking of something he had seen, something he could never say directly. And that's what makes this letter so rare. Unlike his public work, carefully structured, cautiously phrased, this letter was raw, unfiltered. A confession not meant for bookshelves, but for someone who might one day understand. He tucked away the most intimate experience of his life not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real. You see, there's a sacredness to some moments that words can only damage. And Jung seemed to know that the ones who are ready to understand, really understand, will feel the truth between the lines. And maybe, just maybe, that's what you're feeling now. Before the letter ends, Jung shares one final revelation, and it's the kind that lingers. Not everything beyond death, he says, is light. There were presences, not hostile, not evil, but powerful, watchful, guardians perhaps, sentinels of something sacred. He never used words like demons, and he didn't lean on religious imagery. But he made it clear he was not allowed to go further. Not yet. Why? Because, in his words, he had not yet become who he was meant to become. That line alone carries a weight that can't be ignored. It suggests something profound, that the journey doesn't end when the body fails. That there are thresholds in this universe that don't open with curiosity, but with readiness. That beyond this life, our truth isn't just seen, it's earned. And then, with quiet intensity, Jung ends the letter with a single sentence. If you are reading this, it means you've already heard the call. That one line changes everything. This letter wasn't written for the masses. It wasn't for the scholars, the critics, or the casually curious. It was for the seeker, the one who has stood at the edge of something they can't explain and felt it. Maybe that's you. Maybe in a dream, or during a loss, or in that strange silence that follows real grief, you've touched the thin veil between this world and something deeper. And in that moment, even if just for a breath, you knew there's more. This message then is not instruction. It's not doctrine. It's an invitation to remember, to return, to ask yourself, what am I becoming and who must I become to truly be ready? Jung didn't share these words to convince. He shared them so that if someone like you was listening, you wouldn't feel alone. Because once you've heard the call, you can't unhear it. And maybe you were never meant to. In the end, Jung's letter wasn't about death. It was about life. It wasn't a roadmap for the afterlife or a theological argument about what comes next. It was a whisper reminder that the real question isn't what happens when we die, but whether we've truly lived before we do. Jung had touched something beyond this world, and yet the message he brought back wasn't focused on escaping life. It was about stepping deeper into it, about waking up, about remembering who we really are beneath all the noise, the fear, and the masks we wear. He makes it clear. The path to truth isn't paved with beliefs or borrowed doctrines. It doesn't lie in books or in theories that promise easy answers. Truth comes from experience. It's in the moments that break us open. in the questions that won't go away, in the quiet nudges we feel but can't explain. It's in the places we dare to go when we stop distracting ourselves and actually listen. Maybe that's what this letter is. Not a sermon, not a lecture, but an invitation. An invitation to pause and ask yourself, am I really here? Am I really living, not just surviving, not just existing? Because when death finally comes, and it won't come to take something from you. It will come to reveal something, a door, not an end. And the only question that matters in that moment will be, did you remember who you were meant to be? So if this stirs something in you, don't brush it aside. Don't go back to sleep. Write, reflect, share, speak the thing you've been keeping inside, because someone else might need to hear that they're not alone in the questions they're carrying. And if you've made it this far, maybe it's because, like Jung said, you've already heard the call. And now the real journey begins.